But man, talk about a tough spot. I wouldn't want to be there with the Jack-5 kicker. Even with, I mean, there's just a lot. He just threw all the time bank chips in. He just Leroy Jenkins time bank chips. He just knows it's gonna be. This could be a while.
In this video, I'm going to analyze the hand between Chidwick and Curcuma at the Triton Super High Roller. First of all, I think it's very important here to consider that there's ICM in play. However, I have not access to the stack sizes. At this point in time, Curcuma was the chip leader and Chidwick was one of the shorter stacks with around 20 big blinds. We're gonna look this hand from a rather game theoretical standpoint to see what the strategy for both players should be. But of course, always to consider that there is ICM in play.
Would have made a straight.
And of course, also a ton of reads that both players might have that we don't have access to. However, we want to find out what would be the proper theoretical approach to this spot. And then, throughout the hand, I will also give you some hints towards some ICM considerations. So let's kick it off with Curcuma opening the button here, and he was the chip leader, so he will be opening the button fairly loose.
Yeah, he straight came. He flopped top 2, turned up flush draw, and then would have got rivered.
Alright, so Vivek almost was a disaster for him. Now he's back to where he was, 18 million in chips. That's what he started the day with.
It's a little bit of a ride.
He could have had 5 million. He's going to open up the dealer button.
Look at Vivek's face, his face on that all in.
The range that I assign him is somewhere between 44 and 47%. It's very hard to say, but I think that, yeah, and especially a recreational player, he might not be aware of how wide he should be opening the button. I mean, he might be a regular player. I don't really know him, so I assume he might be a recreational. But I think this range is very realistic. Might be tighter, might be looser, but I think he will take advantage of his big stack. The range that Stevie is going to play from the big blind is probably going to be very, very loose. It's just slightly above min raise, so he knows that he's supposed to defend his big blind very, very wide. I assume he will also be reshoving some of these suited broadways, suited connectors. He will have a ton of fold equity, even though we have ICM consideration here. So he might be reshoving 10-9 suited 25% of the time. So we don't know 100%. In a GTO environment, you want to be reshoving those hands with a certain frequency. But I'm pretty sure he's going to reshoving a lot of suited aces. He might be calling just some of the weaker off-suited aces. It's not going to make such a huge difference though. But yeah, and then trapping aces I think is also fairly standard in this spot. And then the flop comes Jack-9 for Rainbow.
In Big Al, they hear it. Big Al fold an ace as well.
So Chidwick, he defends the big line. He is started today second place. Currently, I believe in last place. He's going to check his top pair after defending to Jack-5. So very small continuation from Rajkumar, pretty much trying to just take it down. Denying its opponent equity. Now if you're Chidwick, you got top pair. 20 big blinds, you might check raise sometimes. Can definitely represent some bluffs. I think the standard is to call. He is going to call.
First of all, Steven should always be checking here, and then the in-position player applies a very, very wide c-betting strategy. He wants to be betting 80% of the time, a mix between 1/3 and 1/4 pot size, which is totally enough here. He has a ton of value hands. He doesn't need to bet big in order to set up a stack to pot ratio that allows him to shove for less than pot size on the river. He will accomplish the same by betting 1/4 pot on the flop as well. And also he barely wants to bet big. The only hand that wants to bet big occasionally is pretty much queens here, which makes a lot of sense. It unblocks all the Jack X hands and also 9X hands that might want to stack off. he is performing incredibly well against all sorts of straight draws, because if Steven Chidwick check shoves a hand like Queen 10 or 10-8, Queen 10, of course he blocks a lot of his pair outs, and also hands like 10-8 or King 10 that Steven Chidwick might want to play check shove with, are blocking heavily his outs. So yeah, the only hand that wants to bet fairly big here, and also Jack 7 with a certain frequency. So let's take a closer look what Steven Chidwick's response against a 1/4 pot size c-bet should be. We can see that he should be raising a fair amount of time here, especially with his Jack X. Jack 5 wants to be raising very, very frequently, pretty much always. But here again, we have to consider ICM, right? This is based on chip EV. So in an ICM environment here, if there were other short stacks present, then there is a certain risk premium involved. So that means that Steven Chidwick should be a little bit more careful. He should be raising a little less. He should be bluffing a little less. And he should also be defending a little less. So a hand like, let's say, Queen 5, Queen 6 with backdoors. These should always be folds. They should never be raising here. Also a hand like King 6, King 3, King 7, I would just be folding. So I would be continuing with my gutters, pairs, straight draws, and maybe some strong ace highs. Like I think ace 8 to call once is okay. Apart from that, he should be folding a decent amount of the time, even though he's just betting 1/4 pot here. He's going to be under realized his equity on further streets, because the chip leader is going to apply pressure on turn and rivers, and we have to fold hands here, hands that we would call in a chip EV environment, but given the ICM pressure, we have to fold those hands, which means we're going to under realize a lot of equity with hands in this ICM scenario. So in this spot, Steven Chidwick decided to call his Jack 5. It happens, but mostly calling, and then we see the Queen in spades.
Queen on the turn is going to give Vivek a little equity. Could hit a 10 to make a straight, but not a good straight.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Looks like he's going to reach for more chips. And I like this, actually. If you think about it, the queen actually doesn't hit Chidwick that much, because sometimes Stevie Chidwick is going to 3-bet jam like king queens, queen 10 occasionally, ace queen.
Yeah.
So what queens does he have? You're not going to check call like queen 8 on queen 7 on the flop. It's a pretty cool bet, actually, from Vivek. Very good hand reading.
Yeah, going to put a lot of pressure on a 9 as well.
But it seems like Chidwick's going nowhere. Still going to make the call.
Just dialed in. He's ready. He's in there.
And this is the in-position player's strategy. And we can see there is a mix between betting 2/3 pot and 1/3 pot, which is very, very good. Especially hands that for you guys might be more intuitive to check. But a hand like Ace Jack, a hand like, let's see what else, maybe Ace 9, these sort of hands. Also some very cheap bluffs with King 8 just to have the auto folds against 4/5s or 6/4, 7/4 suited ace high floats. We give ourselves an incredible prize to attack those 4x hands, and even all the ace high hands. And as we can see, against the 1/3 sizing, these 4x hands start folding, unless here they have a flush draw, of course. But 4/5 without a spade is folding almost always, and especially now since ICM is involved, they should always be folding, even though we just bet 1/3 pot on the turn, or we face a 1/3 pot size bet. So it makes a lot of sense. It's always important to keep in mind which range or which part in villain's range are you attacking. However, Raikuma, he bets around 40% pot size, so it's somewhere between 2/3 and 1/3 pot. But we can go with a 2/3 pot sizing here, and we can see that again, in case Steven Chidwick had a jack, it's a very, very clear call. We can never fold on the turn. I mean, yes, Raikuma can have a lot of value hands here, but on the other side, he can have a lot of bluffs. And as we can see here in Raikuma's position, even hands like ace-8, they're mainly going to check back. Why? As you can see, we have so many obvious draws that we want to barrel. Flush draws, hands like ace-10, hands like king-8, all these sorts of hands, and even some random ace-highs are barreling here. As you can see, ace-deuce, ace-3, ace-4, ace-5, especially when we have a spade in our hand. So it's also very nasty when you, let's say, you bet your ace-10 and you face a check jam, you have to fold a lot of equity. So you can see that Raikuma's strategy in position is very polarized. So he's not betting so many open-ended straight draws and flushes. You can see that, for example, 7-6 in spades, 8-6 in spades is checking back a fair amount of time. The strategy we want to apply here is betting draws that have no showdown value, but wouldn't be such a disaster to bet forward with. So 10-7 open-ended straight draw is, yeah, it would still suck, but the point is that it has no showdown value. A weak flush draw though here has a little bit more equity than an open-ended straight draw, so it would really suck to bet forward this hand. So we start checking back those hands more frequently. The same for ace-10. If we have a spade, we bet it more often because it's really good to have a spade blocker on a spade run out. And then we basically just have some random bluffs here with ace highs. And then, of course, some king highs here as well. But you can even see here that some of the king highs we're also checking back, which makes a lot of sense. Again, we have a gutter. We have a little bit of showdown value on the river, but it's of course very, very little, but this is just the principle that PIO is following here, that it wants to find the perfect balance between having enough equity to bluff with, having good blockers to bluff with, but also not wasting too much equity in case we face a check jam. However, we are not bluffing too many ace-8s here and ace-10s actually, which I think in reality might actually happen, and this might be the reason why Steven Chidwick ended up calling.
But you're still going to get called by hands like 10-9, Jack-10, a lot of 10s in there, so I don't think Vivek was completely surprised he got called. And I think if he does bet this flop and this turn card, he should consider bluffing the river.
How much you got left?
How much you got left? That's the, I'm thinking about putting you all in play.
Vivek just acquired back his stack. He is in there maneuvering with them, putting some heat on. 3.5 million in the pot, less than a stack to pot ratio of 1 for Chidwick. Critical pot.
Well, every time Vivek has put in one of those time bank chips, he's shoved it all in. So
would be quite a decision for.
I would love to see him shove it all in. It just seems to make sense that there's a lot of one pair straight draw type hands that would call this flop and turn.
All in.
All
he does
in.
Go for
Amazing.
It. It's gonna put this test to Stevie. And again, Stevie is not a player that is afraid. He is very capable. He knows what's going on. He knows what's the possibilities here. He realizes Vivek is chip leader. He's capable. But man, talk about a tough spot. I wouldn't want to be there with the Jack-5 kicker. Even with, I mean, there's just a lot. He just threw all the time bank chips in. He just Leroy Jenkins time bank chips. He just knows it's going to be, this could be a while.
We face in river on all in from Steven Chidwick's position, and let's take a closer look what kind of hands the button should be shoving here. And as you can see, even King 8 is checking back 50% of the time. Ace 8s, in case they opted to go for a barrel on the turn, are not following through with 100% of the time, more often checking back. King 8 is going to continue barreling around 50% of the time. What else? Let's see. Even the flush draws are going to check back. I mean, they make a pair quite often, so it's not really. Yeah, 10-6 in spades, 10-7 in spades. Yeah, 10-6 made a pair as well. So you can see that even the king high barrels are giving up quite often. So in a chippy V environment, it's super easy to overbluff this spot. And against an all-in, Chidwick should be calling a fair amount of time here with his Jack X. I mean, this is chippy V. So if I would analyze this spot from an ICM standpoint, and I know my opponent is having the right frequencies or somewhat close to the right frequencies to bluff on the river, I would always fold my Jack 5. I would always fold my Jack 3, Jack deuce, even though we sometimes want to end up calling. Yeah, even let's say what else is very, very close. Yeah, I would be folding all my Jack X. Even 10-9 I would be folding. 9-8 of course. So those very weak second pairs I would always be folding. And yeah, third pairs with a 10 or Jack X always folding. And then pretty much just calling my Queen X here. Even Queen 5 might be a fold here in a chippy V situation. But then Queen 8 and better, we're going to end up calling. And then, of course, also straights in 2 pair. I mean, if we look into the buttons range, you can see he comes to the river with a lot of ace highs and king highs, around 30% of the time. So Steven Chidwick is very much aware of this, and it's questionable whether he's going to shove a hand like ace jack or king jack, which I don't think. So,
wow. So Stevie, the clear obvious bluff is the spade draw. You know, like the ace 10. I mean, Vivek actually has ace 8. This is very tricky because Vivek actually has a lot of value here. Queen 10s, king queens, queen X, of course. Of course, two pair plus, straights 10-8, king 10.
I'll tell you.
There's a lot. There's a bluff.
There's a lot happening, man. Chidwick is in the matrix right now, working it out, thinking about it. Maybe you talk about poker, live poker, one of the game's greatest players. He does call.
My
I mean,
God.
welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the big stage. Steven Chidwick,
yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why Steven Chidwick ended up calling. So it's very, very important to keep in mind that even though if you have a busted draw, that very often you don't need to bluff all your busted draws. It's totally fine to occasionally give up. It's very tempting as a big stack to apply pressure. I mean, again here, the button player can definitely bluff with a lot of hands even wider than that. It still forces Steven to fold a lot of hands, but if the button is going 2 bananas here in this spot, then it's a fine call by Steven Chidwick, and he ended up being right and did win the pot. And I think it's a good call. It's definitely a close call. Even though if he was wrong, I would have still think it's a good call, because I also believe that a lot of players in these spots are just overly aggressive. And yes, even though we have the risk premium on us and we are under ICM pressure, it's still going to be a fine call against a lot of players. If you have the right read, of course. If you think your opponent's tight, you shouldn't make these calls. But yeah, if Steven Chidwick thought that he might be very loose and aggressive, then it's definitely a good call. I hope you guys enjoyed the analysis. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you have made the call? Do you think that Curcuma is bluffing often enough? What kind of hands do you think is he bluffing? And yeah, looking forward to see some engagement, and then see you guys next time.